Hello and welcome to episode 87 of the Dragons Are Real podcast. My name is Pete Jones. Well, I don't know if you've seen news hot off the press. Discord may be being sold. For those that don't know, and if you don't know what Discord is, you obviously haven't been playing online much. It was a gaming app designed to allow people playing video games to share chat and text together while they're playing video games. But during this lockdown, as RPGs have taken over in force, the good news is that a lot of it is free to use, so you can have free audio chat, and this is what we've been doing in our online games, using the audio chat and then having separate channels for your games. So it's up for sale for $10 billion. And the interested party? Microsoft. Now, I'm not a big fan of the evil empire, but I can see why they would want to buy it. If it's doing so well during lockdown, they can see a chance to make some money. And no doubt they would have some paid tiers. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with Discord. Won't be jumping ship yet, but we'll wait to see what happens. And I'll leave a link in the show notes to that sale. I've been doing lots of reading recently with lockdown. I've been reading several RPG books lately and PDFs. I really enjoy reading the RPG material. It's great for gaining ideas, for little snippets, for systems, for ways to GM, way to run games. And even a bad RPG is worth reading because it shows you how not to do things. Listening to the Gaming and BS RPG podcast, they were talking about purging your collection and how they go about getting rid of RPGs that they're not playing or have been sitting on their shelves. So I thought, do you know what? I've got some stuff that I could look at maybe purging. And one of the systems that's, for me, it's not something that I'm going to play again, is the Year Zero engine, and I've got a few of their books. So I put up my Alien role-playing game and my Coriolis, and within, I would say, less than 5 minutes of putting it up on the Facebook Marketplace, I'd sold both of them. So that's a nice room in my collection. I've still got Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands that I'm going to sell. And because those games are really hot at the moment, I figure this is no better time than to sell something that is hot and clear the space. And as quickly as I've cleared the space, I've filled it. Yes, I know. The idea was to make space. But I bought the 5e Player's Handbook, Monster Manual and DMG on the pack of Amazon. It was less than 30 quid per book for those. And I figure if we're going back online, from online to face-to-face games soon at a local club, we've got reduced space because our club has moved premises. So I figured that I might run some 5e, and maybe if we've got reduced space, I could run some 5e games for some youngsters and maybe get some new ones in the hobby. And then once we've got them hooked on 5e, we can show them to a few other games. So that's what I've been up to. I think we've got a call-in. I wonder, who could it be?
Hey Pete, Jason here, catching up on old podcasts. Just listened to your Star Trek review. Yeah, interesting game. Definitely an interesting artifact of the time, right? So, Owlbear Rodeo, I used it for combat and against the Dark Master. No character sheets, but just used it for an attack on a village, and it worked really well, which was cool. As far as Journey rules, next time we play, I'm going to test the Journey rules in that system. So I'll let you know how that goes. Zine Quest, yeah, I did a podcast at John Allen Large and talked about everything I backed, and yeah, way too much. But the last thing is, Wise Guys, I got to play an early play test of that with Eric. It's a great game. I really miss Savage Worlds. I think I'm going to try to do some Savage Worlds here soon. So, talk to you later.
And that was Jason from the Nerds Variety, I always get this wrong, the Nerds RPG Variety podcast. Yes, Owlbear Rodeo, it does seem to be getting a lot of traction. I mentioned it a few months ago now when it was first out, and it was a bit dismissed, but it's getting some traction now with the likes of Mike Shea from Sly's Forest mentioning it. I know Old Man Grognard mentioned it on Tencast Kevin. And whenever you look for a VTT request now on Reddit or something like that, Owlbear Rodeo is usually the top of the list. And I think it's a great alternative for people who don't want all the fancy stuff. They just want to throw a map down, move some tokens, and roll some dice. With regards to journey rules, I'm really enjoying journeys in Adventures in Middle-earth. I think having journey rules when you're doing overland stuff really adds something to it. as opposed to you leave there and you arrive at your destination. Let's have something in between. So I think if you're doing that style of game, having some journey rules is well worth it. I did catch your episode on Zine Quest. I liked some of the choices you've made. It's interesting that some of my zines have started arriving, so I'm enjoying those. And for what I paid for them, $4 or $5, I'm really enjoying reading those. And Savage Worlds, hey? Or if Eric Lamoureux from the Wild Eye podcast is listening, Worlds. Yeah, you got to beep it out. You can't call them savages anymore. Right, I think that is the time to get on to the main topic. So today I'm going to talk about those dark places. Those that know me know I'm a big fan of dark sci-fi horror. That started off with watching Alien back in 1979 at the cinema, age 15. I went with my mum, as I mentioned in the previous episode, because my dad doesn't like those sort of films. So although it was an 18 or exit certificate in those days, I sneaked in at 15. Those Dark Places is trying to replicate the feel of films like John Carpenter's Dark Star, Outland, Blade Runner, Silent Running, Alien, Event Horizon, Sunshine, Moon, The Thing. Now, I did a review back in episode 36 on Aliens, the role-playing game, and as I mentioned earlier, I've just sold that. And in episode 78, I mentioned Mothership, which also can be used to play these sort of games, and that's a D100 system. Well, Those Dark Places is a new sci-fi horror game by Jonathan Hicks, and it's published by Osprey RPG Division. And it's only £10 in hardback off Amazon, which is where I picked it up. So if I read the setting for Those Dark Places, you'll get an idea. Those Dark Places is a rules-light, story-focused role-playing game about the darker side of space exploration and the people who travel the stars in claustrophobic, dangerous conditions. Starships, stations and outposts aren't havens of safety with clean, brightly lit corridors. They're potential death traps, funded by budget-conscious corporate interests and running on stale, recycled air and water. The stars may be the future of humanity, but they are also home to horrors and terror the human mind cannot comprehend. So it's a gritty, grimy sci-fi horror setting. The Earth is a shell of what it once was, and although there's 12 billion people still living on the surface, the ecosystem is corrupted beyond saving. The author describes it as industrial sci-fi, and if you look at the Appendix N, as mentioned above, then you get an idea of the sort of setting that you're looking at. The book is written to the reader as a crew briefing. The GM is renamed the General Monitor, and basically the players are playing a crew who served 25 years working for a corporation. They are Deep Space Support Teams, also known as Dusters, and the company they work for is Cambridge Wallace Incorporated. So yes, you're already getting the vibes from Wayland Humani. Basically, you're sent on missions for the company, and once you've done your 25 years, then you can retire. The good news is that when you are travelling across space, you're put into hypersleep. And while you're in hypersleep, this goes towards your service. So if you sleep for 6 months on your way from one point to another, that 6 months is included in your service. So this encourages people to sign up for these sort of jobs. The way hypersleep works is when you leave your current location, you have 5 days of acceleration where the crews settle down and get things working. Then you go into hypersleep. Then you wake 5 days before you arrive at your destination, where you have to do the deacceleration. And then you do all your checks. This is a very simple game. It uses a single unified D6 mechanic, which he calls the odds. One die determines success. And basically you roll a D6 and add an attribute. And you need to score more than 7 to succeed. If the result is below 7, you fail at what you want to do. And if you roll 7 exactly bob on the nose, then you get a success, but it's with a complication. So for most of your tasks, you're looking to roll 7 or more. The GM can alter this to a 6 or an 8, depending on whether a task is easy or difficult. There are no skills at all, but there are 7 crew positions, and you have a primary position and you have a secondary one. If you have a primary crew position, you add +2 to your relevant task, and if it's secondary, you add +1 to your task. If you are doing something against an opposed roll with other PCs, then you roll a d6 on your attributes and the highest wins. The only other slight variation to this is the pressure test, and this is similar to the normal attribute test, but instead of a target number of 7, you're looking for a target of 10. Character creation is very simple. It uses the case system, and case stands for charisma, agility, strength, and education. And you allocate the array 1, 2, 3, 4 to your 4 abilities. So 1's going to be 4, 1's going to be 3, 1's going to be 2, and 1's going to be 1. You then select one primary and one secondary role, and the roles are Helm, Navigation, Security, Liaison, Engineering, and Medical Officer. You add your strength and your education together, and this becomes your pressure bonus. And when you're doing a pressure roll, you add this to your d6 for your fear test, if we call it. Your starting pressure level starts at 0, and I'll come on to the pressure and fear later. You have a small amount of equipment. You have an ID chip for legal reasons, and this can be embedded in your skin or worn as a wristband, however you want to say it in your setting. A comm unit, a first aid medi unit, and you have tasers, which are non-lethal tasers. Firearms are available on a ship, but they are in very limited supply. If we look at combat, basically when you get to combat, you roll your initiative, which is a d6 plus your ability for your turn order. In melee combat, you use your strength score, and if you're a security officer, you add that. When you're doing opposed rolls, the loser loses 1 point from strength. At 0 strength, you fall unconscious, and at -2, you start dying. And when you've got an array of 1 to 4 on your strength, you can see that possibly 1 point could be enough to knock you unconscious. If you're using firearms, you use your agility ability, and again security, and you're looking at 7 to hit. A close range target is 6 to hit, and if a target is dodging, it's 8. Damage is quite cleverly done in those dark places. In basically, everything has got a damage cap, which usually runs from between 1 and 5. So 1 is a punch, a pistol is 3, and a shotgun is 5. And you roll your damage on the d6. If you roll higher than your damage cap, then you reduce the damage to the cap. So for example, a pistol is a damage of 3. If you roll 1 or 2, you get 1 or 2 damage points. 3 or more, you are only causing a maximum of 3 damage. And I think that is a really nice way to do damage. So pressure. As I alluded, this is a horror game, and so pressure is a core part of the game. So when you get to stressful situations, you roll for pressure. You roll a 1d6, you add your pressure bonus, and you are trying to beat a target of 10. If you fail, your pressure level increases by 1, and your pressure starts at 0. When your level next increases, then you calculate your new pressure level, and then you must roll a d6. If the number is less than your current stress level, then you suffer an episode. If you roll higher than it, you're fine. So the higher your pressure level goes up, the more likely you are to fail the test. And basically, when you fail, you have a mental or physical breakdown of the horror you've seen before you. And there's a roll table for the effect that shows them, which can be such effects as reducing your attributes, you run away, that sort of thing. And anytime any one of your attributes reaches 0, you are unconscious. The only way you can reduce your pressure level is between missions. There are no copious amounts of equipment lists or price lists. What you need is on your ship. And as I said before, weapons are very limited. On your ship, there are only 2 tasers, 1 pistol, and 1 shotgun. So this game is not designed for combat. And with the low attributes, then if you get into combat, you're not going to last very long. NPCs are simple. 3 of the attributes are at 2, and 1 of them is at 3. And they only have a primary position, not a secondary position. There are synthetics or automons, as they're called in this game, and players can play as automons. The pressure rules do not apply to them, and they have to follow simple logic, therefore, because they have no feelings. There are no examples of creatures in the book, but you make them as you want, and basically creatures only have strength and agility. In the GM notes, one thing that you'll quickly notice is there are no rules for spaceships. And from interviews I've heard with the author, I believe in the original rules that he had rules for spaceships, but to make the book more concise, these were taken out of the rules, and they're going to be released later as a supplement. The GM section gives you ideas on how to run adventures. There are no random tables or anything like that. It's just pure text on suggestions of what sort of things the atmosphere you're trying to create. It adds more background, adding to the setting. And although the setting isn't hardly defined, it gives you a few details to assist if you're really struggling. There is a short adventure included called the Argent Report, which is basically you find a research vessel deep in space which has been missing for 60 years and reappears. So what do I think of those dark places? Well, I think it really captures the genre really well. It's a cracking little book for £10. And if you want a crunchy game, this is not for you. I would suggest that you go with Mothership or Stay Frosty. But if you want a game where you're really playing on psychological horror and real horror, then this is a little belter. It's a game dominated by claustrophobia and captures the feel of industrial space horror. If you don't like narrative games, then this game is definitely not for you. I think it's really good for one-shots and episodic play where each week you have a different episode. I'm not sure how well it would work for a long campaign, but for a pick-up game, I think this works really well. There are some really good actual plays on YouTube with the author, so if you want to see this in action, and you can see there's not a lot of dice rolling in this game. A lot of it is description and narrative. And what I like about the actual plays is even if the plays are successful, he always adds a little twist on the end. And I think in this genre, that's always good to have that little twist to leave it on a knife's edge. So if you like sci-fi horror games for £10, you can't go wrong with this. The only thing that I don't particularly like is the way the author talks to the reader, but that's just a personal thing. The book is very well written. Well, that's all for this episode. Thank you all for listening. And if you want any more information, remember, check out the website, which is petejones.neocities.org. The blog is dragonsarealpodcast.tumblr.com. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me a voicemail via the Anchor app, or you can email me. And if you want to email me an audio file, then do so. And the email address is dragonsarealpodcast@pm.me. That's all for this episode. I'll catch you all on the flip side.